This is Rob Doggett from the State University of New York at Geneseo and the International Yeats Society. And I'm here today with my friend Hedwig Schwall to talk about Michael Robartes and the Dancer. How are you doing, Hedwig?
Better than our Ukrainian brothers and sisters.
I know we're talking today is the second day of the invasion, and yeah, it is scary. And I actually had trouble sleeping last night. I was reading the news so late, and we have a neighbor. Her daughter was in the Peace Corps in Ukraine. She was out a few months ago, but they're flying their Ukrainian flag right near us here, and so it's just awful right now. But it is good to see you, and it is good to talk about Yeats. And I always find it's been a tough couple of years with the pandemic and everything that's going on, and the rise of authoritarianism all over the place. And I do find it comforting to get a chance to talk about poetry. And so you're emeritus professor of English at the Catholic University of Leuven in Belgium. And I know you from our work together in the International Yeats Society and for the Journal of International Yeats Studies. I've heard you talk a bit casually and at conferences. You've done a lot with psychoanalytic criticism that I really enjoy your work with, the work you've done with Lacan. And lately I've done you more for interviews. I know you're doing a ton of interviews, John Banville, Anne Enright, so a lot going on. So it sounds like you're staying very active in your retirement. What are you working on right now?
Actually, right now I'm doing something Yeats wouldn't like, because it's action in character. It's not character in action. So again, as you said, it's more psychoanalytically organized. I follow the Freudian, Lacanian, Kleinian line. Winnicott a lot these days, and it's because I focus on the good enough mother, and I look at the good enough mother or the parental relationships in contemporary Irish literature. And it's amazing. Like I was reading these days by Lucy Caldwell. It's a brilliant about the Blitz in Belfast, and she mentions Robert Gregory. And then I read Emma O'Donoghue, and she mentions Yeats, Easter 1916. So all these contemporaries, Lisa McInerney, just everybody, they all think Yeats is a great example. Vona Grog, you name it, they all refer to good old Yeats. So he's still there.
I think that one of these days, you mentioned this at one of our meetings, that we should probably do a special issue of International Yeats studies on Yeats's influence with contemporaries right now. I think that would be a great topic. So I talked to you about some possible poems here, and you could choose whichever one you wanted, and you chose this strange poem. It's a poem that I really like. I teach it often. I actually enjoy teaching it more so than I thought. I initially thought it'd be really complicated for students, but actually you get lots of the dialogue generates a lot of really great and diverse reactions, and some strong reactions, especially from my female students. So it's a really fun poem, I think, to teach, but it is complicated too. Now, why did you, of all the poems you could have chosen, why did you choose this one?
As you will remember, I first chose Long-Legged Fly, but then I said that this was another option. And indeed, I suppose the period is interesting. Well, first of all, it's an irritating poem. And I mean, the female students will all disagree and think, what is this bloke on about? So it's irritating, but it has a lot of meat on the bone. And it has been written in a time of great upheaval for Yeats, not just politically, but also personally. So with his shift from Maud Gonne and Iseult to his wife via Markievicz, etc. So it's interesting because he changes his emotions so much. And you can, of course, see that in his work, because it is himself that he remakes in his work. And I've actually written a few articles about the Player's Queen. And most people just make a big detour in order to avoid it. And I just love it, because it shows, it illustrates that indeed he is not in control. And the more he systematizes his mask theory, the less grip he has on it, and the more the unconscious works into it finds its way into his work, and the better the work gets. So in that sense, I think this is a great poem because he contradicts himself all the time. And that's what's always nice.
And it's interesting. I was thinking back to some of my earliest reading of the criticism on Yeats and some of the sort of classic old school scholars, and I remember something from John Unterrecher, and I looked back at it this morning, and I won't quote it, but he essentially says that and he actually uses the word stupid. He says that the woman in the poem is too sort of stupid or stupidly unable to understand the wisdom of Michael Robartes and his brilliant description of the paintings and the altarpiece. And I just thought, oh my God, I can't believe that was how, that's the way some of these prominent scholars are talking about this poem, because I felt this poem is so much more complicated than some kind of, that we're as if we're supposed to simply listen to the wisdom of Michael Robartes. I think he comes off actually as pretty funny and silly and just kind of stupid in his own sort of self-assurance. And I definitely think the poem has all sorts of nuance and irony. And I like what you're saying about Yeats as he's systematizing, being less in control, actually, and that makes a lot of sense to me. But let's take a look at it. And you're in charge of sharing screens, because I have a new computer and can't do that today. So if you could share the poem, and if you don't mind, please read it for us.
Sure. There we go. So can you read it? Can
Brilliant.
You see it?
Yes.
Right. Michael Robartes and the Dancer. Opinion is not worth a rush. In his altarpiece, the knight who grips his long spear so to push that dragon through the fading light loved the lady. And it's plain the half-dead dragon was her thought, that every morning rose again and dug its claws and shrieked and fought. Could the impossible come to pass, she would have time to turn her eyes, her lover thought, upon the glass, and on the instant would grow wise. You mean, they argued. Put it so. But bear in mind your lover's wage is what your looking glass can show, and that he will turn green with rage at all that is not pictured there. May I not put myself to college? Go pluck Athena by the hair, for what mere book can grant a knowledge with an impassioned gravity appropriate to that beating breast, that vigorous thigh, that dreaming eye, and make the devil take the rest? And must no beautiful woman be learned like a man? Paul Veronese and all his sacred company imagined bodies all their days by the lagoon you love so much, for proud, soft, ceremonious proof that all must come to sight and touch. While Michelangelo's Sistine roof, his morning and his night disclose how sinew that has been pulled tight, or it may be loosened in repose, can rule by supernatural right, yet be but sinew. I have heard said there is great danger in the body. Did God, in portioning wine and bread, give man his thought or his mere body? My wretched dragon is perplexed. I have principles that prove me right. It follows from this Latin text that blessed souls are not composite, that all beautiful women may live in uncomposite blessedness and lead us to the like, if they will banish every thought, unless the lineaments that please their view when the long looking glass is full, even from the foot sole, think it too. They say such different things at school. Isn't it mad?
It's such a crazy poem. I think the tone is so interesting. I mean, Michael Robartes is so self-assured and with his Latin text, and then the dancers just Oh, I just find her comments delightful and so funny and undercutting, and it's fun to read in class and have people take different parts. And one of the exercises I've done with it is having people experiment with different ways of acting it out and kind of exaggerating tone to get a sense of all of the different ways that we can interpret the tone in this poem.
I'm afraid that's what I did right now a bit.
Oh, it's okay. I like it. I'm okay with that kind of dramatization because I think it emphasizes, it prompts us to think a bit more about the tone in the poem, and it gets at all of the different ways that we can interpret this poem. I think so I like that. And he starts, of course, with that sort of declaration. In Yeats, opinion's always a kind of negative in Yeats, and he starts with that sort of assured, Robartes does, opinion is not worth a rush. So maybe you can start with that declaration, and then we get that altarpiece, and we start getting into art a bit.
Okay, yeah. Well, indeed. So it's very strange that somebody who in his autobiographies writes all the time that opinion is something one should not discuss. And he opens the poem with the very word. So throughout the poem, he uses the words and he uses allegory, which he says is the minor kind of art, because it's the deeper symbols that are the good ones. So it's very strange that he starts with opinion is not worth a rush. And I was always puzzled, probably because I'm not an English speaker. Is the rush, does he mean a straw, or does he mean you shouldn't be too quick? So you should not be too quick to vent your opinion, because you should think first, you should meditate and actually contemplate. And indeed, throughout Paramica Silentia Lunae, which is the essay that he was writing at the same time, he writes about this fact that you should not lose your head in talk, in opinion with other people. You should meditate. You should look at the Marmorian muse, or whatever he calls it. And then meditation is one level of depth, but then contemplation is another level of depth. So the strange thing is that he starts immediately off with opinion is bad. And then when I read articles by Witt-Prietzsack or by Longley or by other people, they all focus on the fact that who is this he and who is this she? And then, of course, they say he is, of course, Yeats, and then she is Countess Markievicz, because she was opinionated and she was an abstract woman and her voice got shrill like Maud Gonne's, etc. So in this single word, opinion, written at this time in 1918, he thinks back to Easter 1916 and to these revolutionary women. So again, in that one word, a lot is packed already. But then, indeed, as you said, the next line, he moves immediately to art. He says, in this altarpiece, the knight who grips his long spear so to push that dragon through the fading light. So strange is that opinion is a dragon. I mean, a dragon is in China a form of fertility, of rain, of beauty, of opulence, etc. And so a dragon, who is again in medieval stories, is always miraculous, and it's on the side of the fantastic. So it's not opinion. Whereas here in this interpretation of the he narrows the dragon down, a beautiful image, and he narrows it down to opinion. So what the speaker is doing here is actually turning a symbol into an allegory. So he's actually reducing this work of art, which is very strange, because I also, sorry.
No, go ahead. That's fascinating. I had not thought about that, because I often, when I'm teaching it, it's seductive in the sense that the speaker here has this assurance that pushes us into allegory and sort of assumes acceptance of the allegory. So then my first step in teaching the poem is often to ask the students to think, okay, well, how can a dragon represent opinion? What does it mean allegorically? But what you're saying is right. We're actually doing a kind of reduction that Yeats actually would often argue against in his discussions of how we're supposed to approach art. So I think that's fascinating what you're saying.
But the other thing is, of course, that later he will refer to Veronese. He will say to the she, look at Veronese. But Veronese made a dragon, and he made a dragon and a lady. So, no, without the lady. It was a St. George and the dragon. So he again limits the dragon here. Because he then interprets it. He says it's plain that the half-dead dragon was her thought. So again, very much of a reduction, that every morning rose again, dug its claws, and shrieked and fought. Now, when I read like Merleau-Ponty, and because I'm interested in not so much in figures, but what happens in between figures. With my study of the Good Enough Mother, it's all about mother-child relationship, and so Merleau-Ponty has a lot about the in-between, and about the fact that people like mothers who focus on the relationship with their child are also focused on the split in themselves. And so Merleau-Ponty describes how a real self is the one who feels the other claw in himself. He uses the word claw himself even. So he says the other, which is the Lacanian other, should claw at the self, because if that doesn't happen, there is no energy and you're not really alive. And actually, Paramica Silentia Lunae, that's exactly what Yeats says. He says you should call upon the daimon, and you should have him fight with you. He should claw at you. He should make you do things that you don't dare to do, and you will do them anyway. So the dragon is the fighting spirit, is the demon, or you could interpret it that way. And in Paramica Silentia Lunae, he says that's the good thing, that's what you should do, otherwise you're just a mechanical person. So here the dragon is negative, so it's weird.
That's interesting. And go ahead.
And then he says, could the impossible come to pass, she would have time to turn her eyes upon the glass. And then the question is, what is the glass? Is it a mirror? Of course, it's a mirror, but all kinds of things can be mirrors, because paintings can be mirrors, because they can give you ideas of your inner self, of a kind of body image. This will lead me actually to my central point, and that is Paul Schiller and the body image. Because I think that instead of going for a lesson into allegory, the she is more into what do I do with my body image. So maybe I should say something very briefly about Paul Schiller, because he's really central to my thinking. Do you mind?
No, go ahead.
So Paul Schiller is actually a psychoanalyst who lived at the time of Freud, but then he came to live in New York, and he ended his days there. He wrote a book called Delusion and Knowledge in 1922, but his most famous book is The Image and the Appearance of the Human Body, which appeared in 1935. And so he indicates that there is an almost carnal existence of the idea, and body images are one of the basic experiences in everybody's life. It is one of the fundamental points of life experience. So he combines Freudian thinking with, and especially the libidinal understanding of the ego, with the idea of the body. And he says that the body is physical, but with the libidinal structure of the body, of course, if you become sensitive to that, you become sensitive to the worlds around the body, what you radiate, the vibes that you actually give out. And this is where I would very briefly like to show this picture of Adele Bloch-Bauer, which was done by Klimt. And here again, you can see the whorls in the gold. So some people say it's very static because of the gold, but if you look at the lines in this kind of painting, and the whorls and the little circles and so on, that is what Paul Schiller actually meant, and Freud himself as well, and Karl Abraham and Winnicott will pick it up, and many others. So the body is this kind of exudings. And that is what I think the she is more into. Indeed, this is Adele Bloch-Bauer. She was the wife of a very rich sugar merchant and a friend of Klimt. So he painted her twice, actually. It was also hanging in their bedroom. Her husband liked it very much because it so much shows her like a dancer. Even the hands are very beautiful. She's moving. So it's the psychic energy that is actually put into the picture. So she is moving, she is exuding this energy, and it's these exudings that I think the dancer focuses more on, whereas Yeats is Robartes, or the he, is the one who seems to be saying body and soul should coincide, whereas this picture shows no, they should not coincide, they should interact all the time and form a kind of energy of their own. And so indeed, Schiller says, to form body images, there is projection and a personalization. But in addition, the whole body image of others can be taken in identification, or our own body image can be pushed out as a whole. And you can sense body images. Schiller says, I acknowledge only the deep lying factor of the partial community of the body image. So what Schiller is saying is that every person has his or her own body image, and another cannot dictate it. That is the last thing you should do. And indeed, Schiller says the preservation of the body image of another person is an ethical value in itself. And that is what Michael Robartes seems not to accept, because he will be green with rage if the dancer is not showing what he wants to see. So again, he's very limiting there, not only in his argument, but also in his emotions.
It's so interesting because with Yeats, the emphasis on dynamism and energy is all over the place. And then we've got Robartes here limiting that and reducing it. And it's really what you're talking about is a way of thinking about as you're saying a moment ago, the ethics of this poem and how we think about bodies and the control of bodies and the absence of control of bodies and how we interact with other bodies and our own bodies. And I think it's so complicated. And I think you're getting at why some of the students are, why especially some of my female students have been uncomfortable with the poem at levels that I think I didn't realize when even if you critique the he in the poem, I don't think I've been as sensitive to the extent of the critique that we can do, which is what I think you're getting at.
Right. Yeah. Because there is indeed a Merleau-Ponty who talks about the flesh of the world, and that is exactly what is not visible. Because he talks about it in Le Visible et l'Invisible. It is where the invisible and the visible mix. And that is actually what we see here in Klimt. But then there is maybe also another painting that I will try to show. This one. So this is
yes.
It's a rather famous one. It's René Magritte, Les Amants. It's a painting from 1928, and this shows indeed that you cannot know the other, let alone to be green with rage at what they are not showing. So this stresses the non-knowing, that the fact that you don't know yourself and you don't know the other. And of course, Magritte was always a very strong one in showing we can be very intimate, but we don't know each other. So again, it's a counterexample to Michael Robartes and the dancer.
His position with his presumption, I mean, that's what's so weird about the poem and somewhat disturbing about the poem, his presumption of knowledge and the reduction of others, and again that what's ethically at stake in taking that kind of view, I think is exactly right.
Yeah. Whereas of course this is can you see this one now? This is Paolo Uccello with his Saint George who's killing the dragon. So this is I'm not sure whether our picture is not in the way, but underneath on my screen, underneath us is Saint George, but he's not relevant. So he's actually killing the dragon. But interesting is the way in which the woman is connected to the dragon. It's like her pet dog. So she's having a walk and she's connected with a leash to the dragon as if she was taking him for a walk. So she's very friendly. She's not scared. She likes the dragon, and this would actually make sense in the sense that Maud Gonne has always been a flaming inspiration, as George E. Yeats was eventually as a medium. So women seem to be nearer to this unconscious that Yeats wants to so desperately to explore in Per Amica Silentia Lunae and in Solomon and Sheba and everywhere else.
Yes,
so here we see that she's really at ease with the dragon. She doesn't have to be told how to behave in order to find her deeper self. But yeah, so maybe I should go back to the poem.
Sure.
There comes the lady, the she, with the undercutting statement again, always short, very brief, but clear. You mean they argued. And again, he hates argument. He says poetry is good, but argument is not. And he says himself, I mean, the very famous thing where he says rhetoric is the fight with others. And that's exactly what she's saying. You're into rhetoric here. And he says, put it so. So he wants to obliterate her remark. But bear in mind, your lover's wage is what your looking glass can show. And this green with rage tint. Now, this looking glass is something I've always found really interesting in Yeats, and especially when you look at the poem that he wrote in, I think, 1928, before the world was made. Because there, the woman is looking in the looking glass, but not in the way that he wants her to do it. Because she says, if I make the lashes dark and the eyes more bright and the lips more scarlet, or ask if all be right from mirror after mirror, no vanity is displayed. I'm looking for the face I had before the world was made. So she is looking in the glass in order to find her unconscious, and she will do that, but not for somebody else. She does it for herself. Because in the second stanza it says, what if I look upon a man as thou on my beloved, and my blood be cold the while, and my heart unmoved? Why should he think me cruel, or that he is betrayed? I'd have him love the thing that was before the world was made. So that's a very different kind of looking in the glass than what Michael Robartes is doing here.
Absolutely, yeah. This what's interesting to me always is the word wage and this kind of mercantilistic idea here, and sort of the relationship between a woman and her lover as in a sense, calling up a transactional kind of relationship here, where it seems as if what Robartes is saying is, when a man looks at your body, all he will, or looks at the woman's body, he will only care about what he sees in the physical presence of her body, and not all of her everything else, which is why then, according to Michael Robartes, she shouldn't worry about opinions, because that's something that won't be seen. But the interesting idea here is that this kind of exchange, and again, it's sort of, it's a kind of, we feel like Robartes, people take him as this kind of stand-in for Yeats, and yet there's so much in here that runs against the way Yeats often talks and writes and thinks, and certainly not in this kind of transactional sense. So I think that's pretty interesting there. And then when, again, her just one line, question that's so funny, may not put myself to college. And just the undercutting of the whole thing there.
Yeah. Well, but of course, that's a reference to Adam's curse, I suppose, where the beautiful woman with the beautiful voice, who is going to destroy so many men, says, yes, but about beauty, they don't talk at school. So, yeah. As if you wouldn't have your school with your own mirror, like the woman in A Woman Young and Old. She schools herself at home. I mean, what do you mean by college? Life is college. But again, he narrows it down to Athena being reason, the head. So he's not fair. And then he says, for what mere book can grant to knowledge with that impassioned gravity, etc. So this is actually an echo of Ille in Per Amica Silentia Lunae, or in Ego Dominus Tuus. Ille is the one who says, it's not a mere book, it's the image in a book that I'm after. But that's exactly what she is after.
Yeah.
She does not need books or school or college or whatever, but she needs an image that sets her dreaming. It's exactly what Yeats does in Among School Children. When he's among school children, he says, okay, they have their books, but what he does in school is daydreaming. He daydreams about Maud Gonne and about a past trauma, and that trauma then brings about the image of the dancing tree. So it's the daydream that you do at school. It's the daydreaming that this woman wants to do, I suppose.
Yeah.
So certainly no mere book.
That's really interesting. And the force of his questioning is sort of denying all of that again with this kind of turning it in this mythical level and everything so grand to advance this very reductive understanding of what it means to learn, what it means to think about the self and think about the self in relation to the other, and this kind of dynamism that, you're right, in Among School Children, it's a poem about everything we don't really do in the conventional idea of school. It's about the daydream there, which is so much, well, it's in fantasy. That's so much, everything is so important in fantasy, I think, and that's what we're getting there.
Because that's the quattrocento fingers that make him dream, and that's again what we see in Veronese and his sacred company. It's interesting that they're sacred company. So I assume here that what he means by sacred is people who really meditate, who really, I mean, all these people like Michelangelo were poets and thinkers and philosophers, and they were uomo universale. So it was not just school. It was just artwork. As in Long-Legged Fly, it's not Michelangelo who's doing the job. It's his hand moving to and fro. So it's the very bodily metaphors which are so prominent there. Like Caesar is present in the form of a hand under his head, and Helena is present in the form of a foot that is trying to dance, and Michelangelo is there in a metonymy of his hand that is moving. So the body is very important there. It's not the mind at all. And that's exactly what I think she wants to do. But yeah. So Veronese is here put on the scene, and interesting again, along with the sacred company, is that they give proud, soft, ceremonious proof. Now there's an oxymoron. A proof that is ceremonious. Ceremony is trying to convince via ritual, and proof, I think, is trying to convince via evidence, via just one thing. And so it's an interesting oxymoron, the fact that he uses it here. And then he says that all must come to sight and touch. Now, if you combine sight and touch, you get the haptic. And the haptic experience of art is, I think, more interesting than either sight or touch, because it's both at the same time. Like when you see a peach, when somebody paints a peach, you get a haptic feeling because you see you feel with your eyes, and you see with your pores. So you combine seeing and feeling, and that's what he usually likes to do. Yeats, he likes to conjure views that kindle emotions. Again, in Paramica Silenzia Lunae, Dante and Villon, and in his autobiographies, the people that are interesting to him are the ones that have hair-raising emotions. So they see images in their unconscious that really stir their emotions. So it's always very deep there. Whereas here it's, I don't know. It's all, again, ruled because by the supernatural. And it's this supernatural thing that goes on my week. So Michelangelo and Veronese can get unity of being because they can catch supernatural right. And that is something that, I mean, it's just me, I suppose. I mean, that was, of course, part and parcel of Renaissance thinking, this supernatural right. But it's not an obvious thing.
It seems this supernatural right sort of a freezing then of the kind of dynamism that you were talking about before. What's interesting to me in that sight and touch idea is that we tend to think of those as separate senses, that we see something, we're not touching it, as if there's this distinction where we're existing in relation to the art object outside of our bodies somehow, like denying the bodily experience of the sight and the way that sight can feel tactile for us and can actually be much more complicated than simply this division, as if we're somehow walking around, composited, to use the word later, as if like now I'm in my sight and now I'm in my sense of touch. And of course, these are all blended together in all experiences. And then that supernatural right seems to harden everything and give it this, for Michael Robartes, a way of sort of controlling this dynamism and freezing it, I think. And what the dancer's doing is the antithesis of that, the embracing of that kind of dynamism and blending of the senses. I think is what you're getting at. But that makes sense to me.
Yeah. It's maybe I'm projecting, but I'm glad you like some of the ideas. So
it's everything you're saying is helping me to think about my conversations with students and what bothers them in this poem. And it's getting at, I think, the complexities of how we know we experience our bodies, and that we understand this. We know that when we see where it's awakening these other sensual, that they're blended together, that they're not separate, that we don't see in these kind of distinct we don't exist in these distinct sensual modes. And so I think we know that, but what you're getting is how the poem is awakening that kind of awareness. And Robartes attempts, I think, to somehow gloss it over, cover it over, deny it. That makes a lot of sense to me. And then, of course, we get this switch. Well, not a switch, but a kind of continuation that gets at some of the, makes you think of Ireland in the early 20s. I've heard said there is a great danger in the body, and the sort of obsession. And this was Yeats, of course, was really concerned about this kind of rejection of the body and censorship and all that sort of thing. And so it sort of brings that, that dimension into things as well.
That's right.
Go ahead.
Well, then he says, did God in portioning wine and bread give man his thought or his mere body? Well, there's a bit of a he who can tell you what the thought is that you're supposed to have with the body.
Uh-huh. That's
so
right.
In that sense, again, and then I'm really glad that she again blocks this off, and she says, my wretched dragon is perplexed. And she's the more playful because she stays within his interpretation of dragons and God knows what. But she blocks it by saying he's perplexed.
And then the next section, of course, is here. This is Robartes really getting in, like, all right, I have authorities here. If you're not going to listen to me, young lady, let me tell you what's in this Latin text here.
And that is when it really gets when he goes off track, because then he says that it's the uncomposite blessedness that is good. And that goes against, again, all that he says in Paramica Silentia Luna, what he even says in essays and introductions, what he says in his autobiographies. It's because he's always the one who says it's the fight that makes you go. It's the fight that you need to renew yourself all the time. Life is a fight with the daimon. And then he even says that the loved lady and the daimon are in an analogy that escapes the intellect. So he admits that the lady and the daimon, so the inner self, are the ones that have to bring fight, not uncomposite blessedness. Mm-hmm. So it's a bit of a shortcut again. And then he says, again, I have principles.
Mhm.
principle, argument, opinion. He's the one who uses all the words that he's actually doesn't want to hear. So it is weird.
Yeah, reasoning towards using reason to move toward, I think, a simplistic notion of unity of being, which I think is understandable when people hear Yeats talk about unity of being, imagining that as a static space, a blending together into one that is frozen. But what you're saying, and what I think is absolutely right in Yeats, is the unity of being is dynamism. I mean, it's always the conflict unfolding and folding. I mean, it's never this kind of static position. So it's really interesting that Robartes is using everything it's, nice rational argument to get to an end that actually I think is not consistent with a lot of Yeats's philosophy about unity of being. It gets at a much simpler understanding of unity of being as this frozen endpoint. A kind of noun instead of verb, right? Like reaching this stage. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. What do you think of the ending of the stanza? So if they will banish every thought, so this is women then banishing every thought, right? Is the idea he's saying here?
But unless the lineaments that please their view when the long-looking glass is full, even from the foot sole think it too. So what he's saying is something that we've seen indeed elsewhere. So that makes sense. That he wants, again, thoughts, ideas, ideals to be incarnate in
Yeah.
the body. So he wants a unity between image and body. That's understandable. And that's what Schilder would say as well, except Schilder would say you have to renew your body image all the time. And actually Yeats says that as well, because he says, I think it's in this philosophy of Shelley's poetry, that the body needs to be fed with nutrients. The animal body, which is the soul within the soul, needs to be fed by ideas and by luminescence, he says.
Mm-hmm.
So this, in this sense, the philosophy of Shelley's poetry, which he wrote in 1900, so that's a while ago, 18 years ago, already prepares everything that he's saying here. Like, okay, ideas have to feed this inner animal body, the animal body, which I think Klimt painted really well, because you had bodies within bodies there. Except here, he just makes an easy finish, and he says, well, maybe the body and the ideas can be the same, and then you're finished, and that's it, like your work of art. But you don't dictate your muse. You have to be dictated by the muse. So you have to be open to the other. And he does exactly the opposite thing. He dictates the woman how she should behave in order to be an uncomposite something, which goes completely against all his prose and his essays and many of his letters. And then she says, they say such different things at school. And again, the word school is rather interesting. It depends on how you interpret that word. In a narrow sense, indeed, Old Catholic Irish system will be very narrow-minded, definitely. But if you see school like Yeats' own school, the pre-Raphaelites, his father's discussions, the rhymers, etc., then school is life, and then it's much bigger. So,
to kind of wrap some of these ideas up, I was curious about something you talked about at the outset, this idea of Yeats systematizing and the unconscious. The more he systematizes, the more the beautiful messiness of the unconscious comes into it to, I think, deny the desire to turn this system, which comes about through the encounter with the demon and the unconscious, etc., the way in which the system itself, the attempt to operate in the logic of that, I guess what I'm saying is the attempt to systematize is an attempt, I think, to clean up the kind of messiness which actually works against the system itself, because the system itself is about this dynamism and uncertainty and continual unfolding and never hardening into one thing. So I guess that wasn't a question, but I was trying to form that into a question, which is, you said at the outset that you see this poem as one where Yeats is moving towards his, the visionary system and everything coming into a kind of order, and yet the unconscious emerging. So if you wanted to talk maybe a little bit more about that more broadly.
Yeah, well, actually, I did my PhD on the very thing you're mentioning here. So it was on Yeats's, the hysteric structures in Yeats's writing. Mm-hmm. And a hysteric is somebody who is histrionic and who acts all the time, but you have pathological hysterics and healthy hysterics, and he was a healthy one in the sense that he got traction, he got a system, and he got poetry out of it, and so on. So he did systematize his mask theory, etc., in a good way, in the sense that it gave him beautiful metaphors, which, as we said earlier, even contemporaries are still picking up. But as you said very rightly, he had to make the system in order to let it be destroyed by his plays and his work again, and then that gave rise to his writings again. So it's a very colorful career that he had, and a very he faced his demons very bravely, and lost and won and lost again, and that's Yeats for you, and that's why he's so incredible. And he kept singing, because you can only sing, he said, if you doubt and if you open yourself up to disaster. And he did that very well.
And so that I think that's a brilliant way to sort of end. The one thing I'm gonna say as well is that I've, as I was talking about earlier, I have taught this poem many times, and as with a lot of Yeats poems, I sometimes get into a rut with how I'm teaching the poem, and I think I've concentrated a lot on, even though I'm being critical of Michael Robartes' position, I think I've tended to devote a lot of time to explaining the way the allegory is working, and in a sense buying into the ordered side of the system, even as I've been critiquing it. And what your analysis of the poem has done is, I think, opened up a lot more avenues for talking with students about the way in which the poem is so complicated and so much more than Robartes' sort of standardized wisdom, and getting at the sort of messiness and dynamism, the relationship between the body and the other and the unconscious. And I think it's a brilliant way to really get discussion going with students. So I enjoyed this quite a bit. I learned a ton, and I really appreciate getting a chance to talk with you today. It was a bright spot, and I know we're all, and especially over in Europe, it is a dark day, but it's really invigorating to get a chance to talk about poetry and learn some new things. So I appreciate speaking with you, Hedwig. So thanks so much. I look forward to seeing you again soon. All right, take care.
I think it was good to talk about a poet who knew how to write poetry in war times.
Exactly. Bye-bye.